Welcome, busy gamers. Today we're going to be talking about Rogue Tower. What's good, what's bad, and that all-important question, is it worth your time? Now, if you've joined me for another worth your time video in the past, feel free to go ahead and skip to the section you're most interested in, as I've broken it out into chapters for your convenience. And before we move on, if you're enjoying the content, please like the video and consider subscribing. It'll help me if you want to see more. Now, let's head right into the game overview. Rogue Tower was released in January 2022 by Die of Death Games, and it is a tower defense game with roguelike elements and an ever-expanding, randomly generated path. It leans towards the casual side a bit, but it's an indie game with minimalist graphics that sticks to what it says: tower defense, and, oh yeah, tower defense. So at the time of this review, I've played Rogue Tower for about 180 hours on PC. I feel like I've seen absolutely everything this game has to offer, only skipping interacting with the new Splitting Paths game mode, as it's just not something that interests me personally. Now, some of these hours are in the background as I do other things around the house, so that is probably inflated a bit, but it's still plenty of time to give you a good review. Let's head straight into the good. In my opinion, this game has a surprising amount of strategic depth in the placement of its towers, and how each tower is set to prioritize and target its attacks. Many tower defense games center around the spamming of and focusing on certain towers, as well as the creation of choke points. But with the variation of enemy type, random map generation, and the topography in Rogue Tower, it asks a little bit more of the player each time they place out a tower. For example, towers gain both increased range and adjusted damage multipliers by increasing their elevation. But as higher elevation locations may be out of your way, you're frequently having to choose between coverage versus outright damage, or in simpler terms, quantity of shots versus a raw damage or a quality of shot. In addition, there are supporting buildings which provide absolutely no defense or damage output, but they enable a greater power buildings. So these primarily center around mana and towers that utilize it as the Frost Keep, the Poison Sprayer, the Obelisks, etc. All of which are going to put out damage at a much greater rate than that of a ballista, but they do drain your resources consistently. And utilize more and more resources the stronger they become, the higher they level. In addition, you cannot really just spam or empower a single tower type to take care of all of your enemies. Of course, there's an achievement for doing that, but it's difficult partially because each tower is better at killing certain types of enemies, but also because each tower of a specific type you place, the cost of that same tower is going to increase. So let's move on to something else in the good section. There's variety. There's variety in playstyles and upgrade paths within the game. Each tower has a drastically different firing rate, pattern of shot, and special effect that can be focused on and combined to devastating effects. Through the card system, you can focus your unlocks in a way that consistently provides only the towers you want to see, as well as the damage types and focus path you want to go down, especially if you do avoid just grabbing the cheapest upgrade you see. Particle cannons, for example, focus on long-range shots and sniping tactics. When targeted appropriately, they can burn down your large monsters and focus on those with high shields, while allowing others to burn down the chaff. Tesla coils, for example, they attack everything in a very tiny range, and they can be improved so that they quickly apply damage over time effects, such as poison, burning, and bleeding to all of the enemies in its range. Or they can be set up to focus on doing critical strike damage in high bursts as things run right through. Frost Keeps are also unique. They create projectiles, and this is something that's often confused. They do create projectiles that slow enemies within the range. As its rate of fire will increase, the greater the length of the path it covers. While not particularly good or bad at generating damage by itself, it can be combined with poison sprayers and other slowing effects to create killing fields at different locations. I also think the game is quite challenging, and for fans that need additional goals, it has achievements focused around winning with only one type of tower, like I mentioned earlier, or defending from not one, but two or three or even four paths coming directly from your central tower. There's also been several modes added that cause each pathway to split as often as possible, creating a very spider-like network radiating out from your tower. Because there is not one size fits all solution for these runs, it isn't a race to just unlock a late game tower that enables you to easily win. Instead, it's being selective and adaptive and patient with your upgrades, choices, and features that will carry you further and take you into a more consistent place. The last good I'm going to mention here is just going to be its price. I would often wager that players are going to pay around $10 for this game. And if you're a fan of the tower defense games at all, it's going to generate a value in excess of $1 per hour of entertainment. I think everybody's going to get 5 to 10 hours out of this thing for $10. That's a good value for me. Let's go ahead and move on to our bads, though. So for our first negative here, and the one that I have continued to see more and more as I've played, the game lacks the ability to speed up or slow down runs while they're in progress. Both of these things tend to be an issue, though. In your first few runs, you're not going to be progressing far enough for this to become too apparent. Once your map grows, it's difficult to follow the flow of a run or identify problems within your defenses, as you can't slow the game down. So I can back way back from the map and I can see kind of what's going on, but if I'm not zooming in, I can't really tell what the enemy types are. When I do that, now I can't see the whole map and things happen out of my field of vision, and slowing it down would be useful. Now, the more experienced you get, that's going to be less and less of an issue, and then the big problem of, oh, I can't speed it up comes in. This is much, much more pronounced because it causes a lot of downtime just watching a run that you often know you're going to win, but have zero need to interact with. I think even in the footage I'm going to have in the background today, I reach around 6,000 gold that I don't really have a general idea of what I want to spend it on at the moment because I am easily clearing the waves. I will also note that this is a complaint the developers of the game are very aware of. They've stated they have no desire or plans to add the feature. The good thing is there are mods that can add it for you, but honestly there should just be no need of them, and I know many people don't like to modify their games, myself somewhat included. The next issue, and one I can see many people dropping the game from, are poor UI design and controls. The UI has a lot of issues, but chief of which is one you'll likely see several times in the footage playing behind me. You can click on a tower and it brings up a tooltip showing you the level, range, and damage for the tower, as well as several other important pieces of information. Unfortunately, this frequently obscures the circles used to indicate the tower range on the map, and it makes it hard to judge and place towers appropriately. They've improved the controls since I started playing the game, now allowing for multi-placement of towers without re-selecting the tower or copying and pasting the target priorities, but it still feels clunky. Menus in the map don't really respond in any way to the mouse, preventing you from dragging your view around, instead opting for a purely WASD or the arrow keys to perform these functions. Closing tower menus can only be done with a right mouse click or opening that of another tower, versus closing when clicking somewhere else on the map or just hitting the escape button or something of that nature. And now closing the statistics page can only be done with the T button, which is also how you open it. And while I think these things are nitpicky and minor, they really add up. So while individually it might not bother me at all, there are 50 of these little bitty issues, and they add up to make the game just feel clunky and less intuitive than it needs to be. So the final main issue we're going to be discussing will center around the overall clarity that comes out of the game. There are a lot of things we can discuss here similar to above, but we're going to be focusing on how towers level in game experience, the targeting and target priority, the adjacency issues, and the graphics and the enemy types. So in the tower leveling and experience game, towers level and gain experience by how long they're targeting something, versus the number of shots fired, the damage dealt, or the enemies killed. This is further relevant when you realize that towers level their damage across each aspect, health, armor, and shields separately. And this experience is also based on the bar they target. Therefore, if you set your towers to target the most shield and there are shielded enemies presented to your tower, you're going to be gaining experience in damaging shields, and therefore additional damage against shields in the future. Conversely, if you targeted most armor and that group is the same, it's going to be targeting the armored players and giving you armored experience instead. Now, let's go to targeting and targeting priority here. Each tower is going to have 3 lines for customizing how it targets. This is going to be important for players who want to reach later stages of the game, not just for creating and generating the right focus on your experience for the tower type, but ensuring it's targeting a specific enemy type to slow and armored versus extremely fast and minimal health. Target priorities are not a list of if this, then this, and if the first condition does not apply system, but rather it has a hidden calculation behind the scene that weights each of the aspects that you select and compares them to how close those enemies align. Let's move to adjacency. This one relates to how mines, houses, universities, haunted houses, and mana siphons work. In my first look, you probably would have seen me be very confused as to why I was not generating income from a house, even though I was adjacent to it. Well, that's because it was above the house. It has to be on the same level for it to actually work, and so you need to be on the same level of elevation. All right, then we just have general graphics and enemies here. This is a call out what the retro style of the game does. It doesn't bother me from a visual standpoint if it was just simplistic, but it creates a lot of issues in identifying enemy types, especially when you're new to the game. And this has only gotten more difficult with their March of Monsters update, which has added in several additional monsters and bosses. At least this is something that's predictable eventually as enemy types escalate at certain levels. So we've said the good, we've said the bad. Now let's move on to our ephemeral efficiencies here. So this is our channel's focus, and we want to see how Rogue Tower treats your time. For me, it has temperamental controls, the lack of any ability to adjust the speed of your runs. It just misses the mark when it comes to respect for your time. So in addition, the upgrades are one and done. So once purchased, you can't roll them back unless you wish to reset your entire game. And I'm going to guess most players will purchase upgrades that they don't need, polluting their card pool and making their game less consistent, which means they're going to need to reset it at some point, and that will cost them time. Ultimately, it can be played in short spurts with runs being easy to end, and they do award experience even if the end is manually triggered, so I should give it some credit for that. Let's go ahead and move on to our final scores. Our final scores here are overall going to be a 6.5. Tower defense games are very prolific and they're very popular, and Rogue Tower does manage to have some positive adjustments and unique aspects that make it addicting and fun. For the price, it's definitely got value, but it misses the polish and modern features I would need to give it a higher score. The ephemeral efficiency score on this one is going to be only a 4. That might seem harsh. It doesn't always take a long time, but for a game of its style and type, it does absolutely nothing to improve the speed and the efficiency of play, and thus I have to hit it. With basic controls to adjust the speed, I would probably improve this score by about 2, and if they were to polish these tools and adjust the cards and the ability to kind of insert and exfiltrate those, I would probably increase it even further. But with the developer signaling an unwillingness to even make these changes, any improvement will need to come via a mod, and in all honesty, I might not be being harsh enough if the developer themselves ignores an issue that the community is clearly passionate about and that the player base clearly wants. Thank you very much for listening. If you made it to the end of this content, I really, really appreciate you. Enjoy your gaming, and I'll see you in the next video.